Hello, everyone, and good evening. My name is Lindsay Wong, and I am an author and assistant professor of creative writing in the English department at the University of Winnipeg. I am a Chinese woman with blonde hair, and I currently have a Zoom background featuring my forthcoming book, Tell Me Pleasant Things About Immortality, which has a neon pink and blue mushrooms design on a black background. I want to welcome you all to our third event for a publishing speaker series. Today we're featuring a reading and Q&A with the very talented, very brilliant, really funny and acclaimed and recently longlisted Canada Reads author, Uzma Jalaluddin. For those of you who don't know, Canada Reads is kind of a really big deal in CanLit. So we are so lucky that you're here today and spending your evening with us. So today's event will be recorded. So for those of you in the audience, if you do not want to be on camera, we ask that you keep your video off. We also ask you to keep your mics muted throughout the event. And before we start, I'd like to give the land acknowledgement. The Department of English at the University of Winnipeg acknowledges that we live and work in the territories of the Shinnebago, Cree, Dakota, Dene, Métis, and Oji Cree nations. The University of Winnipeg sits in Treaty 1 territory, the ancestral and traditional homeland of Anishinaabe peoples. As a settler of color writer, I am not only committed to honoring and following the lead of the land, water, and cultural protectors of this space, but I also am a constant and forever student of the remarkable stories and their tellings by Indigenous peoples here and around the world. So thank you for the space, and I'm very grateful to everyone for joining us today. If you feel moved to, please share where you're coming from in the chat on Zoom. I'm now going to introduce you to Hugh McLean, a student in my introduction to creative writing class, and he will be introducing Uzma.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm Hugh. As Lindsay said, I'd like to thank Lindsay, number one, for having Uzma here with us today, because I feel like there's so many books out there, and then you find out, wow, there's so many amazing books out there for us to read. So I'll just give you guys a little bit of introduction on Uzma's background. So Uzma Jalaluddin grew up in a diverse suburb of Toronto, but her favorite place in the world is also probably one of my favorite places, the nearest bookstore or library, or I would also add maybe a quiet cafe to sit down and read. Her debut novel, Aisha at Last, published in 2018, is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice set in the Toronto Muslim community. The novel was a Goodreads Choice Award finalist, featured on the Today Show, and was a Cosmopolitan UK Books of the Year and Publishers Weekly Best Book of 2019. Did I miss any? That's a lot. Aisha at Last was optioned for film by Pascal Pictures. I will admit, your second novel, Hana Khan Carries On, published in 2021, I'm even more excited about, because I think I watched You've Got Mail probably half a dozen times. So yes, it was also an instant Canadian bestseller, and is a reimagining of You've Got Mail, but set in rival halal restaurants. I really hope there's reading going on in those restaurants as well too. So Hana Khan Carries On has also been optioned for film, but this book by Amazon Studios and Mindy Kaling. So that's something to look forward to as well. Uzma also writes a culture and parenting column for the Toronto Star and has written for The Atlantic. She lives near Toronto, Canada, with her husband and two sons, where she also teaches high school. I'm also an aspiring teacher, so I'm glad to have an educator and an author speaking and reading for us today. So everyone, give a warm welcome to Uzma. And also, before I forget, I always forget Twitter and Instagram. You can follow her on Twitter at Uzma Writes, U-Z-M-A, and then Writes, or Instagram at Uzma Jalaluddin, U-Z-M-A-J-A-L-A-L-U-D-D-I-N. Thank you very much for giving me the chance to speak, and I will hand it over to you, Uzma. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Hugh. That was a great introduction. Lindsay, are we going to do a reading, or what's next on the agenda?
Yeah, would you like to read for us?
Yeah, I'd love to, for sure. Yeah,
Great.
and then
Thank you so much.
I'm looking forward to tackling all those great questions you have too. All right, so hi everyone. Thank you so much for spending your Thursday evening here with this great event. I'm so happy to be here, and when Lindsay asked me to participate, I was really happy to do that. Lindsay, I think you're like a terrific author. I always make my students, as an option to read your memoir, which is so fantastic. So I'm coming to you from Markham, Ontario. It's a suburb just 30-40 minutes outside of Toronto. And I actually grew up in Scarborough, which is an East End suburb in Toronto. It's a very diverse, multicultural suburb. My neighbors were literally from all over the world, but a lot of my neighbors were from either South Asia, the Caribbean, and the Middle East. And so all of my books are kind of set in that kind of a milieu. And the reason for that is I wanted to represent the people who I kind of grew up with. Hannah Khan Carries On, as Hugh mentioned, is my second novel, and it is a retelling of the classic rom-com You've Got Mail, except of course it is set in halal restaurants. So I'm going to read from the very beginning of the book. It is basically, for those of you who don't know, Hannah is the daughter of the owner of sort of one of those hole-in-the-wall restaurants where the food is really good, but the ambiance is kind of dated. The restaurant is run by her mother, who has been running it for about 15 years within this really diverse suburb of Scarborough. And the restaurant has been struggling, and it starts struggling even more when a brand new kind of halal hipster restaurant opens up down the street. And so the person who's opened up that halal restaurant is a young man. And of course, I write romantic comedies, so the sparks fly between the two of them, but they're not supposed to like each other because they're rivals. But added to all of that, the main character, Hannah, is also a podcaster, and she's an anonymous podcaster. She has this anonymous podcast that she uses almost like a verbal diary, and she just kind of like produces it and puts it out there. And it's basically all of her thoughts about life, identity, the things that she's struggling with. And she herself is a young 20-something. So maybe some of you can relate to this. She's about 24 years old and has just finished graduate studies. So the part I'm going to read is from the beginning of the book, where she's basically, this is a transcript from her podcast, and she talks about the idea of being the child of immigrants and what that has meant for her in her life. Okay, so I promise I won't read too much, but here it is. The name of the podcast is Anna's Brown Girl Rambles, and it's because her name is Hannah and she couldn't think of a better name. Welcome to Anna's Brown Girl Rambles, a podcast about the life of a 20-something Muslim woman in Toronto. One of the questions I posed in my first episode was about family. What do we owe the people who grew us up, who first made up our entire world? It's complicated for the kids of immigrants. I'm not talking about the usual, my parents don't understand thing. My parents believe in the power of choice, and they never asked me to sacrifice my dreams for theirs. Yet I feel like I should anyway. Where does that feeling come from? Is it just loyalty and strong family ties? Is it because, as part of a marginalized community, we all had to stick together to survive, and that sort of experience tends to become habit? Maybe it's about guilt. We are the kids who benefited from the sacrifices our parents made when they decided to move to a richer, safer country. If we then grow up to grow apart, have we become ungrateful villains? My parents would say I'm being dramatic, and maybe I am. Then again, the beauty of running an anonymous podcast is that I can be as dramatic as I like. I do know that for all the benefits of being the daughter of immigrants, the one drawback is I've had to establish my own sense of place. All my extended family live elsewhere, on a different continent, and we don't visit often enough to form real ties. There's a lot of freedom in being a pioneer of your family's history in a new place, of course, but there's a lot of loneliness too. I've had to find my own family to make the sort of friendships that are family. Yet that lack of history means my roots here are shallow. My story is only a few years old. Maybe that's why I'm feeling so restless today, a little bit stuck. I'm waiting for something, only I'm not sure what. This is when I imagine a different sort of restlessness, the kind my parents felt, the kind that drove them to get on a plane decades ago and leave behind their own world full of stories and history for something new. In so many ways, the choices they made have limited mine. No doubt the choices I make will do the same for the generation that follows. I guess we all make peace with that in the end. Thanks for listening. Let me know if you have similar stories and how you've navigated your own world. Thanks.
Thank you. That was so great. And for those of you who've not read Hana Khan Kirzan, it is so funny, but it's also so heartwarming and touching at the same time. Like no one makes you laugh and cry as much as Uzma. So thank you for that. And the audiobook is so good too. You have to listen to it. Today we have a lot of questions from the audience and from students. So I thought I'd go through as many as we can, and then if there's time left, you can ask questions in the chat. So I think a lot of students here are really interested in your journey as a writer. Could you maybe talk about what inspired you to become an author, and how long did it take for Ayesha at Last, your first book, to be published?
Sure. Yeah, I get this question a lot. Actually, my story, if any of you are aspiring writers or kind of dabbled in the idea of thinking that you want to pursue writing, this story might either depress you or it might encourage you. So my story is that I've always been interested in writing, and the spark of my interest, of course, is reading. I love to read. I'm a lifelong reader. My only hobby that I have is reading. Basically, I'm not very good at any sports, and I've tried to pick up knitting and crocheting over the years, and I'm not very good at it. So the only thing that I've consistently done is read. And that voracious reading is across all genres. I love fiction, nonfiction, everything. Like if it's got a good hook and it's an interesting plot, I'm there. And over the years, I've basically dabbled in writing. I've written everything from short skits and plays to I had a diary when I was a teenager. I was a very angsty teenager, so I kept one for about 10 years, and it was really there that I developed my voice. So my first, I would say, real paid gig as a writer was a column that I wrote for the Toronto Star. I actually, about 6 months ago, retired from that column, so I should probably update my bio. But I wrote it for about 7.5 years as a parenting and culture column. And at the same time, when I was doing that, I'm also, mind you, still have a day job. I was teaching high school throughout all that. But right after my second son was born, and he's about 15 years old right now. So to give you a little bit of a sense of time, I realized I had this crazy idea that, I'm going to be on mat leave. I'm going to have a significant birthday. I was going to turn 30, not anytime soon, but it was on the horizon. And I thought to myself, okay, I always said I wanted to try my hand at writing. It's now or never. And so I sat down, I thought, okay, I'm going to be on maternity leave soon, and I'll have an infant baby and another 2.5-year-old. This is a great time to start writing a book. Big mistake. So I basically, that's how I started. And I was very practical. And I think that's one of the things that I've always had is, as much as I am a dreamer, I'm also very practical. I knew that my pursuit of being published, considering I had zero context in the industry, I had no idea about publishing at all. And I didn't, even though I was an English teacher, I didn't really know how to go about actually writing a book. I just knew that I loved to read. I thought, now or never, but also this is going to take a while. So I would take my infant son to a nearby coffee shop. Like he was saying about going to a coffee shop and reading, I went to a coffee shop and wrote. And while he slept for about 45 minutes and my other son was at preschool for about 2 hours for twice a week, I knew I had nap time in the middle. So I went to a coffee shop, bribed myself with this sugary confection. I don't know what it was, some kind of frappuccino, mocha, I don't even know. And I would sit down and I would write. And slowly, over the course of years, I finished Ayesha at Last. I started it in 2010. It wasn't the first thing that I started to write. It was a second book that I came to a few years later. And I finished the final draft that eventually became the book somewhere in 2016, 2017. So my first book took about 7 years. And I am a slow writer, but not that slow. It took that long because, again, I was kind of writing it while I was raising babies with my husband, and while I was working full time as a high school English teacher. And so it was like written in stolen moments. I got a lot faster for Hana Khan. Hana Khan was written over the course of 2 years, and I got even faster for my third book, which will be out in June. It's called Much Ado About Nada, and I wrote that in about a year. And my fourth book, which is also coming out At the end of this year, I wrote that in about 9 months. So seems to be getting faster. But those 7 years when I was slogging and, kind of writing, and Lindsay, you know what this is like when no one's waiting for your manuscript because you haven't sold anything, you haven't proven yourself. Those were the weeds. Those were hard days, but I'm also quite nostalgic for it because I felt like I had the chance and the freedom to really explore what kind of writer I wanted to be.
Yeah, people don't see how much work goes into an unpublished manuscript, your first book, right? A lot of it's just waiting, a lot of it's a lot of self-doubt, right? And then
Oh,
all of a
yeah.
sudden they're just like, oh, you just, it seems like you woke up and decided to write a book, and that's not true. And it's always, I think, really inspiring to hear that it was a process, right? For both of us. I think it took me 6 years to write the woo-woo, and to hear that, yours was a long journey too. I think people can really learn from that. So
Oh,
thank
yeah,
you. Mhm.
definitely.
And 2 more books this year. That's so exciting.
Yeah, I had
Really, really
like you were saying, like it's been a long journey, and like the 2022, of course, we've all been having very difficult past few years, right? The pandemic and various other things that are happening in our society. But I can say that 2022 was a bonkers year for me, just in terms of kind of managing my day job of being a high school teacher, which I still enjoy, as well as 2 book deadlines at the same time. I also have a play that I've been kind of on and off working on over the course of the pandemic. And so the 2 books in the play are all kind of coming out in 2023. And from the outside, if someone were to just look at my rarely used Instagram, they'd be like, oh my God, you have so many exciting projects coming up. But there's like, no one knows the blood, sweat, and tears that went into all three of those projects, and how tired I am. You probably see it on my face. I'm really tired all the time.
No, but you don't look tired, but you work so hard, because whenever I text you, you're just like, I'm on deadline every time I talk to you. So I know you work really hard.
You have to, right? To get anywhere.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's all about the hidden work and
Yeah.
tears and
The
blood.
hustle. Yeah.
Exactly. The hustle.
But
It never goes away.
yeah, exactly. But I also have to acknowledge that there are plenty of people who work extremely hard and I also don't get anywhere. So there's luck, there's timing. There's at this point, I had 1 book published, so I met really great editors, and I also have the privilege of being married to someone who's extremely supportive. So I have a lot of things kind of that have helped me. I work hard. Yes, of course, the work ethic is there, but there's lots of hidden kind of things that have profited from that success. I hate it when people are like, oh, I work really hard. Like everybody works hard. There's other things that also come into the play,
It's a combination, right? Luck, timing, but
Yeah.
it's the hard work that's going to get you there. That's what I always tell
Yes.
aspiring writers.
Yes.
So work ethic. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
And for those, I think a lot of writers here are aspiring. Could you maybe describe the process for finding an agent and then getting your book to editors?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. This is some of the stuff that I actually didn't know. And I really had to go about and try to educate myself and do a lot of like internet digging about how does publishing even work? Because there's the art and craft part of it where you sit down and you get to create something and you get to explore maybe like your rich inner creative life, which is really fun. But then the business part of it is actually, how do you get your book from your computer screen onto into people's hands, hopefully. So the first thing is to be traditionally published. And that means basically to get your book published by, like a publisher, a traditional publisher in Canada, meaning you're not paying to self-publish your novel. You usually need an agent, or if you're going to go with a small press, you would approach the publisher directly. A literary agent is someone who works for you, is sort of like your partner on your publishing journey, but they are not someone that you pay directly. So they work on commission. If you ever meet a literary agent who asks for you to pay them up front, you should run, because they are a charlatan and a predator. So finding, as you can imagine, because literary agents, basically they choose you, you choose them, it can be really difficult. They are inundated oftentimes with requests from aspiring novelists, and they only choose the project that they think they can sell, because they eat when they sell books, right? So that's something to keep in mind. It's very common for authors to query many, many, many different agents, and to get rejected by many of them. So I was fortunate to, have some time to kind of do a little bit of internet research / stalking of various people who were agents. I wanted to know that they would be open to representing the kind of book that I wanted to write, which is a very diverse novel. Like I knew that my characters would focus on a really niche community, like Muslim Canadians living in the East End of Toronto. So it's a very particular point of view. And I didn't want to work with someone who would be like, okay, that's great. Now let's throw in some like toxic cultural stereotypes, or like, why don't you include this? I knew the kind of person that I'd have to work with would have to be very open-minded about that. And I was doing my agent search around 2016, 2017. And I know it wasn't that long ago, but it feels culturally like it was a different time. The kind of push for diversity that we see right now was really in its infancy, I would say, in the mid 2010s. So I managed to find, basically, when you're looking for an agent, you have to come up with it's like a cover letter. It's called a query letter. It's a little one pager where you introduce yourself. You basically say who you are, what your experience is, what your book is about, how long is your book, and why you think this agent would be a good fit. And then you throw it into their inbox and you hope and pray for the best. And most of the time you get rejections. But if you're lucky, someone will respond to you. They might even ask to read some or all of your manuscript. And if they think that they can sell your manuscript, because it doesn't matter how nice you are, they need to make money, right? Everyone has bills to pay. They will offer to represent you. So I was very lucky. I had 3 offers of representation after many rejections. And that was for Aisha at last. And I basically had a phone call with all 3 of the agents, and I clicked with one, and she's my agent to this day. She's a lovely lady who lives, originally she was in Boston, and she recently moved to Texas, and she hates it. Her name is Anne, and she's been great. So we've been working together for about four agents. And so once you have an agent, the journey is not done. Now the agent has to do their job, which is try to sell your book. So now they have to turn around and look at all of their contacts that they have in publishing. And now they have to make a list of who they think would be a good fit for the kind of book that you have. And then they turn around and pitch your book to those editors. And this whole process can take literally years. This is where the depressing part comes in. They might send it to an editor. Editors are very busy people. Maybe the editor will get back to you in a month if you're lucky. And then the editor will pass, or the editor will say, this was great, but can you revise it and resubmit it? And it goes back and forth. And editors, of course, as picky as agents are, editors have to be even more so, because the books that they acquire, meaning that they buy, have to fit the list that the publishing house is putting out for that year. So it's a really long, complicated journey, but millions of books are published every year. So take heart, and you have a great chance, as long as your book is, what they're looking for. So for me, I found my agent. We revised Aisha at last. We sent it out into the ether. It was also rejected many times. And ultimately, HarperCollins Canada reached out and said, yes, this is the book that we're looking for. We want to work with you. And we've been in business ever since.
That's an amazing story. And it just shows that persistence, right? And finding the right partners, the right for the stars to align in publishing, right? For things to work, because sometimes an agent will send things out and no one bites, and it's heartbreaking for everyone.
Oh yeah. It happens to everyone. This is a business of rejection.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I mean, HarperCollins, right? They chose right. Like, look at you now. So it's an amazing story.
Thank you.
And then some students were curious about, how do you know when a work is finished, right? How do you know when it's ready to send to beta readers, or to send to your agent?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so when I first wrote my first book, Aisha at Last, it was a really long process. Remember, I said it took 7 years for it to kind of reach the final point. And I think at various points during those 7 years, I thought I was done. So I'd write a draft. I think my first draft I wrote in 3 months. And then I spent the next 6.5 years revising it. So maybe a year later, I gave it to my husband, and he was like, this is great, but maybe you got to fix this character and that character. And then I worked on it for another 6 months, and I gave it to someone else. And they were like, I'm not really feeling the main character. Maybe you should rethink that. And over again, I kept giving it to various people and trying to seek their feedback. And they had major issues with a lot of the book. It was the plot. It was the main character. They're not interesting. They're not likable. The plot really lags in the middle. So for me, I learned by fixing the book, giving it to trusted readers. I have some beta readers that I use. At the time, honestly, it was just my friends who are readers and my husband. I didn't really know any other writers. And kind of getting their feedback. But it takes a while for you to really develop that writer instinct. I think I have it now, but I'm almost like 15 years into this process. I think I developed it within 6 to 7 years, and I definitely developed it the more I wrote. So in this past year, as I said, I've worked on 2 novels and a play, and the easy answer would be the draft is done because the deadline is there and you have an editor breathing down your throat. Hello, hi, we have a publishing schedule. We paid you, give me the thing. But the other answer is you just know. It's an instinct. It's like, I think I got it to a decent enough place where I need to get outsider feedback in order to make it even better. And that's kind of it. The problem with writing is that sometimes it can attract a sort of a perfectionist viewpoint, which is really not good for you. I mean, perfectionism in general is not a really great trait. It's something that I think a lot of writers do have, though, where we just keep fiddling with words. Oh, let me move that sentence here. Let me kill this character off. I don't like the position of that semicolon. You will drive yourself crazy if you do that. Sometimes you just have to put it down and walk away. And I will say the times when I have put down a book and walked away for a couple of months and then come back to it with fresh eyes, I can see where it really needs, what does work and what doesn't work. So time is really helpful as well. If you think you're done, but you're not sure, put it down and go do something else, not for a day, but for weeks or even a month if you possibly can, and then come back to it with fresh eyes. And you'll see the flaws, but you'll also see the good stuff. And it's just practice.
That's really good advice, being able to step away and then come back with fresh eyes, right? Because I think there's always that impatience, right, to get something done and send it out, right?
Yes.
But I think it's a long process, writing, as you will find out later.
Yeah, this is not an industry for people who are impatient. Then you should just be a journalist. It was great when I was a journalist and I worked for the Star. I would send something to my editor, and a week later it was in the newspaper. It was awesome. It was immediate dopamine hit, But if you want to write a book, you're in it it's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Yeah, for sure. It takes years to publish a book, right?
Unfortunately.
Yeah. And then some students were really curious about, how do you do retelling? And then how do you go about the adaptation of that retelling, especially for Yisha? And I think with Hana-Khan, you did a retelling a bit of You Got Mail. So how do you do that?
I never set out to do it for Aisha at Last. It wasn't supposed to be a Pride and Prejudice retelling. I thought I was writing a completely original story. And it wasn't. This is why you need readers to read your books and kind of point out things. It wasn't until I've told the story many times. A writer friend of mine, 5 years into my drafting process, read my book and said, "Oh, I see what you're doing. You're writing Pride and Prejudice." And I was like, "No, I'm not." And then I realized she was right. And I felt so dumb. And then I went back and I was like, okay, if I'm doing Pride and Prejudice, I'm going to do Pride and Prejudice. And I leaned into it. I reread the book. I'm a huge Austen fan. It's public domain, FYI. So I thought, okay, let me see if I could put in some Easter eggs for the Austen fans. And I just really, I didn't follow the plot. It's more of an inspired by Austen as opposed to a complete retelling of Austen. But there's the big scenes that people think of. If any of you are familiar with Pride and Prejudice in particular, there's the meet cute scene is really important there because there's a mutual disdain from the main characters. It's a classic slow burn enemies to lovers trope, if any of you are romance readers. And there's a couple of key scenes that I wanted to include. So I had that as kind of the plot, and I literally engineered it backwards. When I came to You've Got Mail retelling, what happened with my first book was I decided to lean into the Pride and Prejudice retelling, because remember, I was writing this in 2016, really different time period for the whole we need diverse books movement. I did it, I would think, as more of a reactionary kind of response to growing up without a lot of books that reflected my identity as a Muslim woman, as a South Asian woman. I didn't trust that publishing would get what I was trying to do on the Muslim representation, the South Asian representation, the second generation immigrant representation front. And so I thought, if I weave in a really familiar tale of Pride and Prejudice, I'm more likely to be marketable to publishers. They're more likely to take a chance on, oh, it's Pride and Prejudice, but with brown people. Okay, cool. We understand what that is. And it worked. And I thought, okay, this worked the first time. Maybe it'll work for the second time as well. Let's take a beloved, I'm a big rom-com fan. Let's take a beloved classic like You've Got Mail. I mean, who doesn't love Nora Ephron? She's great. But really what You've Got Mail is at its heart is a story about two people who get along in one medium, but don't get along in another medium. It's a classic epistolatory kind of story, like a letter writing kind of story. And I took the bare bones of that story and I transplanted it to Scarborough, and I transplanted it to rival restaurants, and there's a podcaster in there, and there's business, there's neighborhood scuffles and drama and stuff like that. But when you market it as a You've Got Mail retelling, all of a sudden people can situate the story in a cultural landscape that's familiar to them, and they're more likely to take a chance on you. So remember how I said impractical? This is the practicality of my writing career. Because most people aren't really familiar with like Muslim stories. So I'm like sneakily getting in there using this kind of stuff. And then Much Ado About Nada, my book that's coming out this June, you should all pre-order,
Yes, you should.
is basically a persuasion inspired by Persuasion, which is probably my favorite Jane Austen novel. But what is Persuasion? It's just a second chance romance. The characters were in a relationship, they knew each other, but then they broke up, and now they're back in each other's lives again. It's a classic tale. But I'm hoping that helps.
That's genius. I had no idea that you were able to do that. I mean, that shows like brilliance, right? Just take a story and be like, I'm gonna tell, like sneakily put in, Muslim stories and it's relatable to readers. Oh, yeah, we should talk more about that. I need to learn from you.
Anytime. Call me.
That's great. And for a lot of students are actually wondering as well, maybe you could take us through, a regular writing day. What's it like for you? Because you teach, are you teaching full time now as well?
I am I'm 2/3 time. So regular teacher teaches 3 classes. I teach 2 a day.
Mm-hmm. So what is it like to balance writing and teaching? Because we have a lot of aspiring English teachers here in the audience.
Yeah,
they want to be writers. They want to be you.
It's really tough, guys. I'm not going to lie to you. It's teaching is exhausting. There's a reason why I didn't get my first book was published in 2018 in Canada, and I started teaching in 2003. So you guys can do the math. I did have 2 kids in between that, and children are also exhausting. And babies need a lot of attention. So, but it's definitely possible. In fact, I think teaching is the kind of career that really lends itself to pursuing other things on the side. Just be aware of the fact that you will be tired. You'll be working all the time. A typical work day, I go to work, I come home, I get home around 1 o'clock. Because I teach 2/3 time, which again is a privilege, right? Because it's a pay cut. And I, have lunch, I relax for a little bit. Usually sometimes there's errands that I need to run. My husband or I will cook dinner, whoever's turn it is. And oftentimes I don't actually get started writing until the evenings. And sometimes I try to get a couple of hours in the afternoon if I possibly can, but oftentimes that's time for errands and just dealing with the kids and make sure they do their homework, things like that. In the past year, I basically started work around 8 o'clock, and I would go until midnight almost most days. And then I get up and I do it again. And if I'm really on a time crunch, I'll get up really early in the morning and put in an hour and a half in the mornings. And I would definitely work all weekend. I was starting to burn out actually, and I realized that for my mental health, I really needed to take a day off, or at the very least take an afternoon off. So I would force myself to not work either on Saturday or Sunday. But there were days when I just couldn't get to the writing because I had essays to mark, or I had lesson planning to do. And, I'm a senior teacher now, so I've had quite a bit of experience in the classroom, so I can get my work done relatively fast, but you can't really rush marking those big summatives or doing that really intensive lesson planning that you do at the start of a semester or at the start of a term, right? Like you just can't get away from that. So in any given week, what I would do when I'm drafting a novel, I would give myself word count goals. So I would say, okay, I have a heavy school week. I'm going to try to write 5,000 words this week, which is not a lot, but it was something. And day to day, I wouldn't maybe reach my like, oh, I'm supposed to write 1,000 words. I might reach it that day, I might not. But over the course of the week, I know that, and I keep track. That's how I kind of motivate myself. At the end of every writing session, I'd say, okay, I wrote 500 words today. That's good. So tomorrow I'm going to try to do 1,000. And then maybe I do 1,500 because I was on a roll. And the next day I would get nothing done because I had a test to mark or a test to prepare. So that really helped. And I basically worked through my summers. You know how teachers, get those glorious summers off, those 2 wonderful months off. I worked through them for the past 2 years. So I didn't actually have a summer. I think I took the July long weekend off, and that was it. I worked for the rest of the time. Not a recipe for a very restful experience. I hope this week this year I'll be able to take at least 2 weeks off in July. I don't know though. It depends.
I hope you're getting on vacation because you're probably the hardest working writer that I know.
I'm the hardest working writer I know too.
I think you are in our friend group. I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm clearly doing something wrong. You guys are all way smarter than I am.
No, I think I spend most of my time sleeping.
Naps are essential. You know what? Naps are part of the creative process. I'm convinced. Yeah.
But it's so great to hear about your process because it's just, word counts are really important. Being disciplined, right? But also taking time off. I think that's key to having a successful writing career, plus teaching and working as well. Because I also don't write every day. When I'm teaching, that's my teaching day, and then my writing day is when I'm off.
That's smart. Yeah. No, I mean, I do work through weekends and holidays, but I realize that working 7 days a week is just a prescription for a total breakdown, and it's not good. And I could see the signs. I was getting very exhausted. I was getting very cranky, and I was like, it just wasn't fun anymore. So I had to be like, I need a day off a week just to recharge. And I would spend my day off a week. As I said, I'm very boring. I do laundry, putter around my house, go see my parents, read a book, but I wouldn't do work. Not even teaching. And obviously some weeks are busier than others. If it's exam time, it's like, okay, I need to get to it, or I'm a deadline. But I would try to definitely take 1 day or half a day off. And I saw a question asking about NaNo. So for those of you who don't know, NaNoWriMo is the National Novel Writing Month, which is every November. I have, and the goal, if you participate in NaNo, it's all, honor system, it's totally self-motivated, is to write 50,000 words. I've never done it. Because I don't like people telling me what to do. So that's a short answer.
That's great. I think that's something a lot of writers have in common. We don't like being told what to do. That's a stubborn, independent streak. And another question from students: how has your writing style changed over your journey as an author? Have you noticed any differences when you first started out?
I think I've just gotten better and faster. I think I really struggle. I've never struggled with characterization. I think character and dialogue is one of my strengths as a writer. I just always have like random characters kind of talking to me in my head. I think this is very normal for writers. It's not, I don't have voices in my head. I just have like characters kind of like right now I have a character who's obsessed with chai and he wants to tell me about his tea making. And I'm like, shut up, I'm in the middle of a presentation. Stop talking to me. But I always struggled with plot. I was like, okay, what's the structure of this thing? Like how do I get to like a good pacing? And my books are well paced, but that's because I rewrote them many, many, many times. So I think over the course of the 10 to 15 years that I've been writing and the 6 years that I've been publishing, my plots have gotten a little tighter. Because I do write commercial fiction. I don't write literary fiction, which kind of has the luxury of a meandering plot. Commercial fiction has to be a little bit tighter. So I think my plotting has gotten better. And just in general, I think I'm faster at finding the holes, being like, oh, that's not going to work, kill off that character, this storyline doesn't work. With my third book that's coming out in June, I started writing it and I think I got to almost 30,000 words and I was like, nope, wrong character. The main character is the wrong character. So I had to basically rewrite the first 30,000 words, which is about a little over 100 pages. But I could see that. Usually I get to the end of the book and be like, what's wrong with this? I don't understand why it's not working. And then I have to go back and fix it, which is, it's terrible to throw out 100 words, but it's worse to throw out 300. So you just get better and faster.
Yeah, and you learn what works, what doesn't, and when to let a project go, throw out things, and get less attached, I think. And that's like a sign of, I think, of becoming a better writer.
Yeah. And you also start to trust yourself. Like if this idea doesn't pan out, it's not going to be the end of the world. This is not the only idea I will ever have. And all of my success hinges on this one character and this one idea doing well. You trust that your brain will come up with solutions for problems and new stories. And I think that's really the wisdom of experience and time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, trusting yourself. That's a key component of writing, for sure. And what advice do you have for the aspiring writers in this class and the audience?
I would say, Stephen King wrote this fantastic book called On Writing. It's one of those classics. And one of the things that he said towards the end of the book has really struck with me. And it was a line that said, writing isn't a support system for your art. It's the other way around. And what he meant by that was you can't expect to live your life with being like a capital A artist and everything in your life has to, fuel that art. You have to live your life and the art comes out of living your life. And I read that book, before I was published when I had babies kind of like clamped to my ankles and demanding that I feed them every 3 hours. And it just made me feel like it's okay. I can do this part of my life. Deal with the parenting and the early years of teaching and the slog of life, really, and the art will come. And it did. So keep that in mind as you move forward. Like live your life, fall in love, have a breakup, think about it, listen to sad music, go to school, finish your degree, get a job. All of this stuff will help you down the road, and the art will come. It'll come out of all of that.
That's great advice. I wish I had known that when I first started. That's wonderful.
Hugh had a question about writing picture books. This is you, right? Mm-hmm. This is interspecialty. Curious if you have any thoughts about picture books. Hugh, I'm the wrong person to ask. I have zero thoughts. I barely read them even when I had babies. But all the best. They are the ones I did read are some of my favorites. I'm sorry. I don't want to say something and be wrong.
Yeah, we're not picture book people. We're novel people. We're long-winded, or at least I am. I have another question for you from some students, and they're wondering, how do you find the motivation to keep going if you get a negative review or a bad critique from a reader?
So this is always going to suck when you get a bad review from someone. So I stopped reading Goodreads. I did it a lot with my first book, and you can't kind of stop yourself from reading the Goodreads comments, but they are a rabbit hole of despair. Goodreads is for readers. It's not for writers. Never respond to a negative review, by the way. Okay. Like you have to take yourself out of the equation. After the book is out there, people are going to have all sorts of responses. So the negative reviews do impact me. I think they impact most people, but they don't impact me as much. This might be because I'm a high school teacher and I have a pretty thick skin, and I'm the mother to two teenage boys, which is always a harrowing process. And I guess for me, over the years, I've learned to separate the author Uzma from the person Uzma. The author Uzma wrote this book to the best of my ability, and it is an imperfect thing that is now out in the world. I can't go back and change any of it. It is done. It represents who I was at a certain point in my life. And the person Uzma is going to exist and be fine whether people love my book, or don't love my book. Maybe they'll hurt my feelings, but I'll be fine and I'll move on. Now, when I was younger, I can tell you that before I had any success, before I had published any of my books, I'll tell you a quick story. Aisha, at last, I don't even know, maybe my 5th year of working on this book, I gave it to a friend of mine who was a published author. And she read it and she gave me some quite harsh advice. She, said, trying to pick a voice that isn't mine. I think someone is not muted. Shai, you're not muted. Yeah, if you don't mind. And she gave me quite harsh advice. And in fact, it was so harsh and I was so new to writing that I basically stopped working on the book for 2 years. So it was quite devastating. But that was on me. It wasn't on her. I don't think her advice was wrong. It was just like, I was like, okay, maybe I'm not supposed to be a writer. Maybe I'm not supposed to do this. And I think it's fine to be your sensitive artistic self, curl up into a ball, feel terrible, talk about how no one understands you. It's fine. But the people who actually are successful and get published in one way or another, acknowledging the privileges of all of that, all of the things that go into that, are the people who can manage to pick themselves up and keep going, in my experience. And it's hard. And like, for instance, like there are members of my family I know who did not like my book, who did not read my book. That's even worse. They didn't even bother reading it. And that's okay, because you know what? They still bought a copy. It's all good.
At least your family bought a copy. Some of my friends didn't even buy a copy. They just pretended it didn't happen. That's what happens when you read a book. Your friends don't care. Friends and family just pretend.
They don't care.
Yeah.
It's very humbling. Very humbling.
Yeah. No one cares except you, the writer. Someone is wondering about a HanaCon sequel. Will there ever be one? Do you think so? But I know it depends on the publisher for sure.
Oh, HanaCon sequel.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Would you ever do one? I think it'd be so great to see a sequel. Like, what happens?
I think even for Aisha at Last, people have been asking for a sequel, and for HanaCon, definitely. I guess for me, I just have at this point so many new ideas for different characters and different storylines and different worlds. I haven't felt the urge to go back into the worlds I have created. So I'm definitely, it's not discounted for sure, but it's not top of mind.
Yeah, that's great. And of course, like Mindy Kaling is doing this the TV series. So what's that like, to option TV and work on it and hear from a famous actress?
Yeah, that was very, very cool. Actually, it's for a movie with Amazon. So it's been great. The great thing is I don't have to do anything. So when a person's IP, so their book or their whatever it is, gets optioned. What an option means is that a producer or a studio, in this case, both a studio and a producer, Mindy Kaling would be working as a producer, and Amazon is a studio that would distribute any movie that might result, basically says, okay, we're really interested in your story. We want the option. We're going to draw a little box around your book, and we're going to explore and try to turn your book into a movie or a TV show. In my case, it's a movie. And there's a time limit. It's usually like a year, maximum 2 years, and they pay you a little bit of money. And for the period of the option, they basically kind of own your story, and they're allowed to exercise their right to develop a movie or a TV show or a video game or whatever the case is, based on the characters and the plot that you've created. And your job as the writer is to just let them. So they hire another screenwriter who reads the book and says, okay, this is my vision for this movie. A movie is going to obviously be very different from a book, right? Or a TV show is going to be different from a book. And they go about trying to, first, even finding the screenwriter is difficult, and they find the screenwriter, and then the screenwriter works on it and has conversations with producers that you may not be part of. Okay, the screenplay is great. It's not great. Okay, now let's see if we can find a director. Let's see if we can attract some actors who might be interested in this. And they kind of work behind the scenes and try to make this a thing. Hollywood is so incredibly slow. This is what I've realized. My first book was also optioned. The option lapsed, and it's been re-optioned to a Canadian production company recently. But when it was initially optioned to Amy Pascal, they tried really hard. They hired a screenwriter. She wrote a great screenplay. We were interviewing directors. I even was in on some of those calls. But it's just a really long, arduous process. And it's like, wait, is that director available? Oh no, they're busy making an Iron Man. Okay, let's talk to this director now, and let's see if we can get a famous art actor involved. And this is constantly happening for not just your book, but like 100,000 books all across around Hollywood. And yet they know that maybe 25 of those books out of 50,000 books will actually get turned into a movie. So it's a really long, arduous process. And I knew going into it that there's a chance that my book won't actually be turned into a movie. But it didn't matter to me, because the fact that Hollywood is interested in my books, which are very, very much about Muslim South Asian community, tells me that there is an increasing interest in telling diverse stories. And to me, that's really important, because I grew up in a complete lack of it. So I'm hopeful that a movie will be made. The screenwriter's great. I'm always hopeful, but I also have nothing to do with it, which is awesome, because I have too many jobs already. I can't do this on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a testament to how talented you are, that, they're making a movie, and let's hope it gets picked up. I would love to see both books on a big screen, and your two new coming books. That's always really exciting.
Thanks, Lindsay. You're too kind.
Oh, no. I'm just honest. There's a message, a question from someone asking about your beta readers. It sounds like you give your drafts to a single beta reader at a time, revising it in between. I find that interesting. Was there a specific reason why you chose that route, as opposed to sending your draft to several or all of your beta readers in one go?
It depends. In the beginning, I didn't know a lot of writers. And so I would give it to like the two reader friends that I had. I also don't know a lot of readers. And they would kind of get back to me in their own time. Someone would read it in a week, someone would read it in 2 months. And I would take their feedback as I got to it, or I would give it to my husband, who's quite insightful. It wasn't an intentional strategy. It was just, I didn't have any resources. I didn't know anyone. I'm not super active on the interwebs. I hate social media. And so, now I've made a lot of writer friends on Twitter, and like Lindsay has kindly offered to read my books, which is really great. So now I do, but at the time I didn't. And then I think what happened was I just, got published, and then I had my editors and my agent to read my books. So I didn't really need the beta readers anymore. The reason why you don't give it to all of your beta readers at once is because, remember, beta readers are like, time is currency, right? You don't want to impose on your beta readers. All my beta readers were like busy working women with children. I know their time is very limited. They're not going to read my book 3 times. They don't love me that much. They might read it once. So I'm going to give it to 2 of them. They're going to read it and be like, this part sucked. I'm going to fix it. And then I'm going to give it to a 3rd person, and then see if they say that I did this part better. That was really the thinking behind it.
Yeah, it's funny how your process evolves. Like, as a student, you make friends in your classes. So I always tell my students, be friends with everyone in that class, because these people are going to read your manuscript over and over again. And then, once you graduate, people get more busier and busier, and then your pool gets smaller, and then you end up just relying on your editor and agent for feedback. But I mean it. Send me your work, Uzma, anytime.
I know, Lindsay. You're so nice, and likewise.
But you're also very busy, so we're both pretty busy.
Yeah, it's a problem.
Does anyone have any last minute questions? I don't see anything in the chat. Do you want to maybe talk about your book? Your book's coming out at the end of the year. Where can we pre-order? Is there a launch? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, so I have 2 books coming out. So the first book is coming out June 13th. It's called Much Ado About Nada. I'll type it into the chat here. Much Ado About Nada. I know it's a Shakespearean title, but it's because I couldn't resist the pun. The main character's name is Nada, which is a reasonably popular Middle Eastern Muslim name. It's also a Mediterranean name. I didn't know this, but my friend's mother is Macedonian, and she's like, that's my mom's name, Nada. But of course, Shakespeare's play Much Ado About Nothing, Nada is kind of slang for nothing. So I thought it would be kind of a punny title name. So this is a second chance romance, and it takes place at this massive Muslim conference that takes place in Toronto every single year. About 10 to 20,000 people kind of descend on the city, and they attend this like really fun, family-centered conference. And it's also like a huge, like families come with their kids, but it's also kind of like a huge hookup spot where people kind of meet others, and either they meet them for more serious purposes like marriage, or they just meet them because they want to meet someone. And so this my novel, half of it takes place at this conference where these two characters, Nada and the love interest Baz, basically bump into each other after many years, and so sparks fly again, and we see lots of drama unfolding. The second novel that I wrote is called 3 Holidays and a Wedding, and I co-wrote this with a Toronto author, Marissa Stapley. And this novel is coming out, I believe, at the end of September. And it is a really fun, it's my first co-written work. It is a multi-faith holiday rom-com. So it's, those Christmas movies, those Christmas books that come out that are all about the holiday season. They're, of course, very Christmas focused. And growing up, I was like, well, where are the other holidays? How come they're not represented? So our book is set in the year 2000. And this is a real thing that happened when Christmas, Hanukkah, and Ramadan, so the Muslim month of fasting, and Eid, all happened in the month of December. And it was a really special time. And I'm writing a Muslim character. Marissa is writing a character who is half Christian, half Jewish. And basically they're on a plane to Toronto, and the plane, in classic Christmas movie fashion, there's a huge snowstorm, which actually did happen in Toronto around that time. There's a huge snowstorm, and they have to kind of make an emergency landing in this tiny town, which is really special. So it's a multi-faith holiday rom-com coming out in September. And I'll type the title for that too. 3 Holidays and a Wedding. So my first book is, I think, available to pre-order, but the second book, I think, will be available.
So great. They both sound so good. I can't wait to read and listen to the audio.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah. And I'm working on a play as well, and but it'll be a very limited run. But the books are more widely available. Yeah.
When's the play, and is it where is it being performed?
Well, it'll be in Montreal for a couple of weeks in March, and then it will most likely come to Toronto. So if any of you are in Toronto, I'll probably post the dates on my Instagram.
Oh, great. I can't believe you novels, you do plays, and also screenplays too. I know you're working on one as well.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yes, the play is being produced. The play is it's actually being cast right now. So if any of you are interested, you can check out the casting call. It's also on my Instagram.
That's great. We have some playwrights in this class as well, and some performers.
That's great. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Uzma. Like, that was wonderful. And it was so nice to hear all your insights about writing and hear about your new books and the class. We're so happy you came, and we learned so much from you.
Oh, it was a pleasure. And if any of you have any follow-up questions, you can email me. If you go onto my website, you can find my email address. My website is just uzmajalaluddin.com. I'm also on Instagram and Twitter. And I try to respond to people, but as you can tell, I'm kind of in the middle of all of my million deadlines. So I do my best, but come and say hi if you like, or if you have a question, I'll try to get back to you. Thank you all for showing up.
Thank you so much. And I hope you all have a good evening. Thank you to the class for coming, and the audience. Let's clap for Uzma.
Thank you so much.
All right. Have a great evening, everyone. This will be recorded and posted on the U of Winnipeg YouTube. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lindsay. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you.
Great. Good night. Bye.
Bye.